Welcome back to Starting Line. I'm Chris Carpenter. Recent tragedies across the country has put more attention on school safety, both nationally and here in Minnesota. After hearing from school officials, teachers, and local communities, Representative Anna Wills is proposing legislation aimed at strengthening school safety by providing funding for school resource officer training. Representative Wills met with us to discuss House File 4387 and how it would make schools safer.
House File 4387 focuses on training for school resource officers, or SROs, which is the program where law enforcement is contracted to come work in the schools to keep our kids safe. And we have a program here in Minnesota for SROs, and unfortunately, not very many schools actually have an SRO. About 300 schools out of about 2,000 schools actually have one, but there's kind of a twofold approach that I'm looking at. So in this bill, it's looking at ensuring that they get training and that some guidelines are put in place by the commissioner and the Minnesota School Safety Center, which is tasked with providing training, and they have been training throughout the state over the years that center has been in place. And the funding, I think, is the key part of this bill. Right now, the school districts would have to just use their own funding, their own resources to cover any costs of training. And as far as the money that is in the bill, it's structured in such a way that it would be grants to help cover up to 50% of the cost of the training, to incentivize them to make sure they're getting training specific to working as a school resource officer, working with kids, and making sure that they're well prepared. And so my bill was included in our education finance omnibus bill, and we put the dollar amount at $400,000, so that can be distributed throughout the state to help cover those costs for training.
And you mentioned, was it only 300 school resource officers? That seems like a low number. Is there a shortage, or why is the number so low? Do we know?
I think part of it is it's kind of a newer concept to have these partnerships. And it is happening around the nation. Other school districts and schools throughout the United States have SROs, and we actually heard about an individual in Maryland when there was a school shooting a few weeks back who was able to stop the school shooter. And so having a school resource officer is a valuable asset to the schools, but because it's so new, and I think also because there's a cost. I mean, you're paying an employee, and the school safety revenue that we have in law, well, it's currently called the Safe Schools Levy, and we're changing it to Safe Schools Revenue because we're going to change the way it's structured so that it's not a burden on the local taxpayers as a levy, but being covered by state aid. We feel it's that important to help make sure that this is funded and increasing the funding as well. So that's another bill that I have actually, and that was included in the Education Finance Omnibus Bill. And that funding goes for several different resources that schools can choose from, and it includes SROs or licensed school psychologists, licensed school nurses, also any programs that deal with drug abuse or violence prevention. So the funding gives schools flexibility and options to choose which resources they need. So it doesn't mandate that they use it for an SRO. And I think that that's very intentional because there are some schools and school districts throughout the state who don't feel comfortable with having law enforcement in their schools. And they would rather have law enforcement on call if something were to arise. And we want to respect that at the state. And so there's other schools that want to have these partnerships and they maybe can't afford it. So being able to increase this funding is going to help get them to the point where they can help fund that. And in some school districts, they use their own resources from this funding stream and from general operating dollars to cover the cost of an SRO. Some of them split the cost 50-50 with the law enforcement in the community. So it does provide a lot of flexibility for them to be able to have an SRO if they need one.
You said in a press release last month on your member page, you've listened to school officials, teachers, and others in local communities. What kind of conversations did you hear from those folks?
Well, it was a combination of hearing the testimony in committee from several different principals and a lot of, mostly it was school counselors and psychologists who were sharing what they're seeing with students in their schools and just the demand on their time and resources that they feel like they're not able to meet the needs with their current level of resources. And then I had an opportunity to meet with folks from my school district and just have conversations with them about what they're seeing and what the needs are in their school district. And it's just a common theme throughout the state, small districts, large districts, and kids are just facing more and more challenges these days, and more of them are struggling with anxiety and mental health issues, and we just want to make sure we're providing the resources where the need is the greatest, and making sure that we can help these kids.
Funding for Representative Will's proposal to create a school resource officer training grant program is in the Omnibus Education Finance proposal passed last Thursday by the House. Speaking of omnibus finance proposals, the legislature will likely be spending a lot of time on these over the remaining 3 weeks of the 2018 session. To learn more about what's in them, you can visit the House website, www.house.mn. Thanks for watching The Starting Line. We'll see you next time.